Who here is here because of Ron Paul? You see, I knew you were going to say that. And I don't mean you're here for Ron Paul tonight, although obviously that's true, but because of Ron Paul, right? I am. That's why I'm a libertarian. And quite frankly, I consider Ron Paul the greatest American who ever lived. And I always call everybody the great this and the heroic that, but Ron Paul's in a league of his own, absolutely. And with that, it's time to bring up our first speaker of the evening. He's Ron Paul's most loyal right-hand man. For a generation, serving as Ron Paul's foreign policy advisor, as in his congressional office, as director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, and co-host of the Liberty Report, my mentor and role model and hero, the great Dan McAdams.
War is the mother of all government programs. War is the health of the state. War is a racket. All wars are bankster wars. Foreign policy is war by other means. All wars are launched from a mountain of lies. Cancel foreign policy. Sell the embassies. Responsible statecraft is an oxymoron. Isolationism for the government, internationalism for the people. Let's go on a little journey. Let's journey to where the LP, powered by the Mises Caucus, very soon has a serious major voice in policy in the United States, including foreign policy. What does the Mises Caucus pursue as the driver, intellectual driver of the LP? Reasonable critique of what's happening in Washington? Yeah, things are more or less okay. A couple of things we don't like. I gotta tweak the system a little bit. Or are we talking about a radical realignment? Radical realignment. As my great friend Scott Horton said, I spent my good part of my career as Ron Paul's foreign policy advisor. Let's imagine a world, let's imagine a United States without a foreign policy. Without a foreign policy. It's like taking a leap off a cliff. What? We don't need the State Department? We don't need 50,000 employees of the State Department? We don't need the FBI and the military in hundreds of countries overseas? What are we going to do? How are we going to stop the Chi-Coms? How are we going to stop Putin, who's knocking on our door with some missiles? What are we going to do? Well, without a foreign policy, we would be a country of individuals obviously free to make our own way. Who benefits from that person sitting in the embassy? Is it you or I? No. It's the well-connected. It's the military-industrial complex. DC is a duopoly on most things, but especially when it comes to foreign policy. Just last week, the president, well, 2 weeks ago, the president said, hey, I need $33 billion more for Ukraine. And Congress said, hold my beer. We got 40, and we're just getting started because that is actually 55 or so now. Bernie Sanders, the great progressive, anti-war progressive, walked hand in hand with Tom Cotton, the horrible neocon, to vote yes. Give them the money, send it over there. The squad, right with the neocons. And what was the reaction when one senator, a guy we might know from Kentucky, said, hang on a second, guys. I know you're trying to rush this through, but is it possible to send this $60 billion over there and include someone to at least maybe just a bookkeeper to figure out where it's going and what's happening to it? You know how he was pilloried. You know how Rand Paul was pilloried for that. He literally was in the pay of Putin. He literally was over there shooting Ukrainians by just suggesting that we have somebody in government like the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction, probably the only government employee that's be worth keeping, because his name is John Sopko, and I'm sure some of you have read his reports over the years. Well, his final report, and that was delivered in January 15th of 2020 before Congress, his final report concluded that the United States government lied over and over and over for the past 20 years in Afghanistan. They lied. They encouraged their employees to lie. They encouraged everyone involved to lie about how great Afghanistan was going. A few more weapons, a few more surges. Keep lying, keep lying. It was a lie, and trillions of dollars were flushed down the toilet because of it. We don't want that. They don't want that. They don't want that to happen. They can't stand it because, again, all wars are based on these lies. And another lie about this 60 billion, 50 billion, 40 billion, however much it is. In fact, as Dr. Paul wrote in one of his columns recently, half the GDP of the entire country of Ukraine is our aid from February till now. Half the GDP. Oh, well, there's a lot of people that are pretty messed up in Ukraine right now, and it's a pretty bad situation. We're going to build them some houses, give them some medicine? No. No, 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 no. They just announced $687 million we're going to go to Raytheon because we sent all of our anti-tank missiles to Ukraine. And we don't have any. We haven't ordered any since 2005. So we're going to get some new ones. And Raytheon, who just happens to be the former employer, or at least board member, our current Secretary of Defense, he's delivering the goods. He's delivering the goods. Speaking of Ukraine, the shifting narrative on Ukraine is interesting. That plucky democracy that had to be supported with all of our tax dollars, we had to send it over because we had to preserve democracy. That same democracy which we destroyed in 2014 when we overthrew an elected government and put in a puppet government that, as in the US, people weren't that thrilled about having someone they didn't vote for assume power. Well, that shifted. There was an out-of-the-blue invasion by the Nazi Putin. Well, that is shifting. But first, we said Ukraine is winning, send money. The media in bed with the government, in bed with the social media. If you say anything questioning the narrative that Ukraine is winning, you're out, you're disappeared. It's a lot worse than in Iraq, where you were just ridiculed. You're out. But now, if anyone's been reading the mainstream media this past week, it's pretty interesting. New York Times, Washington Post yesterday. There was another big editorial, I forget where. They're saying, hang on a minute, things are pretty bad there. We sent a lot of stuff over and it's not doing that well. Gosh, Ukraine is losing. Nobody saw that coming. It reminds me of the mid-2000s when Ron Paul and a few others had been screaming about how stupid it was to invade Iraq. And thankfully, we know now from last week that George W. Bush agrees how terrible it is for one man to take us into war. Do you remember when we turned Iraq into a big pile of rubble and, 5, 6 years later, gosh, nobody saw that coming. Oh, really? Okay. And I got a minute left, so I want to keep on schedule. War provides government the cover to implement the police state at home. We talked about, again, how the past couple of years, COVID tyranny, that's the war on COVID, war on a virus, great excuse to cut down on our liberties, cut you out of social media, which is in bed with the government. Steny Hoyer, remember that? Last week, down on the floor, don't you dare criticize the president. We're at war. They love that, don't they? How dare you? We're at war. Intelligence agencies lied. The war on terror brought us a surveillance state, thanks to some people like Julian Assange. The war on COVID brought us medical tyranny. The war in Ukraine, the total silencing of dissent. It brought us the Department of Homeland Security, teaching us about disinformation, something they're pretty good at. So war is steroids for statists. War propaganda is the government slipping us a roofie, right? Just take this little drink and pass out. You'll feel better. To end war, we must fight war propaganda. It's too late once we're at war. You've got to fight war propaganda, and they know how to come at us. Libertarians especially, because they like nothing better than to say, see, even the libertarians are with us on this one. That's nothing like more. So to fight war, we have to fight war propaganda. But I would propose to all of my friends here that when you do have an enormous influence on power, you consider the idea that we must end foreign policy as such. Over and done. Thank you.
Right. Well, you guys already watched the Liberty Report, but if not, well, now you know what I mean. That's why he's the great Dan McAdams.